We're live.
Well, thank you very much, Ruth. Thank you very much. Welcome everybody to this meeting of the Combined Authority on a Friday afternoon. We've got a couple of apologies and replacements. So we have Councillor Jeffrey is giving apologies, but Deputy Leader of Wakefield, Councillor Jack Hemingway, is here. Please wave, Councillor Hemingway. Thank you. And Councillor de Gorn is here for Councillor Aspen from York. Councillor de Gorn, do you want to wave at us? Thank you very much. We have a number of faces on the screen. I think it'd be helpful for people who may be watching live just to know who is a member of the Combined Authority, so voting members. Not everybody you see on the screen is a voting member. Some are officers who are supporting us with our decision making today. So can I just ask people, if you're a member of the Combined Authority, please may you raise your hand so people know whose members are voting today. That's lovely. So people can see those. Thank you very much. So let's start with the agenda proper.
Sorry, just to point out, I'm a non-voting member, I believe.
Did you put your hand up there? Did you, Councillor de Gorn?
Yeah, just to clarify, I'm a member, but not a voting member.
Oh, yes, no, absolutely you are. Yes. Thank you for that clarification. So moving on to apologies for absence, I think we've done. Ruth, was there any more that I may have missed there?
No, that was it, Councillor Hinchcliffe. Thank you.
Thank you. Declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests. Anybody any disclosures to make? No, none. Exclusion of the press or public. I don't think there's any items on the agenda that require that today, is there, Ruth?
No, we haven't.
That's lovely. And then minutes of the meeting of the Combined Authority held on 27th of July. Those minutes have been circulated. Is everybody happy with those? Please show. Thank you very much. It is carried. So those meetings will be taken as accurate representation of that meeting. Moving on to the first item of the agenda, which is COVID-19, something which is preoccupying all of us at the moment at different stages and different challenges. Obviously, each of the local authority leaders and indeed members here today is involved in their own local authorities in fighting this biggest challenge we've ever faced, really, not just on health, but economics. And today we've got Brian Archer, who's going to go through with us the response, the economic response that the Combined Authority is doing to support businesses, particularly at this time. Obviously, we've all our own stories to tell in our own local authorities about the people affected. Obviously, we know in Bradford, for example, 545 people have died, but the infection rate is still too high, and that is obviously a worry for health in the district, but also for businesses who are trying to seek to open safely. So, Brian, would you like to present this item? And then we'll take questions and comments from the members. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. There's some huge challenges out there for businesses at the moment, in particular access to finance. That issue has not gone away. The Chamber of Commerce survey this week said that 1 in 3 businesses across our region had less than 3 months cash reserves. And I think it's fair to say that the banks have been overwhelmed. The bounce back loan applications amounted to more than 35 billion nationally, and I think 1.2 million loans have been approved by the banks. And I think because of just the sheer volume of applications, that's led to delays in funding getting through to businesses. And we have provided support to some of those businesses to accelerate access to finance. At a local level, I'm pleased to say that working with the growth managers and local authority colleagues, nearly £500 million worth of grant support has gone out to 36,000 businesses across the region. Working with the growth managers and the helpline, I think that's a fantastic achievement in a very, very short space of time. And of course, it's not just about access to finance, it's about access to business advice and information. And at the start of the pandemic, we had a business mentor scheme where we matched mentors up with various businesses to provide them with specialist consultancy support. And based on the success of the mentor programme, we managed to secure another £1.3 million from government to support specialist consultancy advice in affected businesses, and that could be used to support things like marketing, IT, finance, and recovery planning. Moving on to skills, I mean, obviously we've got some huge challenges again across the region. 344,000 people are on furlough at the moment, and the government's contribution to furlough decreases by 10% each month, 10% this month, and then the scheme ends in October. The impact of that is likely to be an increase in unemployment and benefit claimants. We've already seen that benefits claims have gone up 3%, and we've got in our region 131,000 claimants on the count at the moment. So some big challenges ahead as people start to come off furlough. The government's response to that has been to launch the Kickstart Scheme on Wednesday of this week. Obviously, young people are going to be disproportionately affected by that. The Kickstart Scheme is to support 16 to 24-year-olds. It's a £2 billion national programme where young people can be given a work placement for a minimum of 20 hours a week. And that programme will run until December 21. And it's targeting young people and those on universal credit and those most at risk. Now, in our region, we've got 26,000 eligible people. So, you know, a significant number of people that are at risk. So we will be working closely with partners to ensure we can place as many of those people into work as possible. Now, larger employers have been asked, larger employers that can offer 30 or more placements have been asked to register with the Department of Work and Pensions nationally. And locally, employers that have got less than 30 placements to offer have been asked to work through representative organisations in the locality. And we're in discussions with partners at the moment and taking expressions of interest through the Skills Hub to try and place as many people as possible into local businesses. But I think an important point to make with regards to Kickstart is that employers and job seekers need clarity and confidence that the scheme is going to lead to meaningful work, to quality jobs, and that it's not exploited by unscrupulous employers, and that it does actually help to change lives and make a difference. We're still pressing government for more funding. Obviously, a letter to the Chancellor has made a significant funding ask to support our strategic priorities around health innovation, digital technology, the transition to zero carbon and entrepreneurship. We're looking to increase the number of business startups to around 20,000 new business startups. And that ask of the Minister is around 750 million. And if you look at the economic impact, and we've done various modelling scenarios, that would deliver an £8.5 billion impact on the economy. So, I mean, simplistically, if we put £75 worth of taxpayers' money into the region, the Chancellor and the economy would benefit by £850, which is a tremendous return on investment. So I would hope that that's a very compelling and persuasive argument for the Chancellor to loosen the purse strings and help to rebalance the economy. At which point I'll stop, and I'm happy to take questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I know that's something that Roger Marsh, Chair of the LEP, makes sure we bang on about all the time, which is the investment that government make in us, make sure that the taxpayer generally nationally gets a big return on the investment that's made here in the region. So there's certainly that £75 invested and £850 back is a very good deal, I would have thought, for UK PLC. Obviously, jobs are just vital, aren't they? If we don't get this right, then this has equally bad health impacts on people as coronavirus does. And I think we're all mindful of that. Just one thing in there, it does talk about the 4 products in the economic recovery plan. Just a reminder, we're working on a 5th, which is a cultural piece at the moment. We all know that across the region, culture is vital for economic recovery and regeneration. In each of our local authorities, we have big cultural assets which draw a lot of people in and make it also an attractive place to do business. And we want to support that sector as well. So can I see any hands up for questions or comments on the paper in front of us today? Councillor Groves.
Yeah, just on the number of claimants, Brian, do we know how many vacancies there are right across West Yorkshire? So how many sort of people will be applying for one job?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the exact figures to hand, but I think there was a figure quoted earlier, I think, for the Leeds region and for Bradford in terms of applicants per job. I think it was 14 to 1.
Yeah, I think it was 7 to 1 across the region, wasn't it? And 14 to 1 in Bradford, sadly.
Yeah.
That's the one I remember, I'm afraid. It's a lot of people there seeking employment and therefore skills, and that employment brokerage that we do as a combined authority is absolutely vital. All the employment hubs in each of the 5 local authority areas, and I think York does something similar as well, are really important for the road ahead.
And in terms of the Kickstart, will we use the big anchor organisations to make sure that young people right across the region have the opportunity and it's not just focused in one area?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. But the larger employers that are offering more than 30 placements can only do that nationally. DWP have insisted that they've got to go through the national registration process. So again, I think that's really important. I suppose the other point to note on that is obviously the public sector is a significant employer, and I think it's important that we support the initiative and that we all get behind it and offer up as many placements as we're able to, so that we can lead by example and support some of our disadvantaged young people.
That's absolutely right, actually, Brian. Angela, can you just sort of confirm that we are doing that, because we need to practice what we preach on this?
Yes, it's certainly something we're looking at, because you're absolutely right. We need to set the example here. So we are looking into our contribution to this.
So any more comments or questions on that paper?
But Chair, just one last one. Would we be able to do that through all our infrastructure projects that we're going to be procuring out?
Angela?
We can certainly take that away and look at what that would mean for the programme and the timings.
And that's certainly something, thinking about the skills, that's something we're asking other people to do in terms of big infrastructure projects in the region. So again, if people are investing billions in a railway, they should also invest a significant amount in skills to be able to build that railway. It is going to be a huge investment, is HS2 and NPR for this region, and we have to make sure that people are able to take advantage of that economic opportunity. Councillor Galton, did I see you indicating?
Thanks, Chair. I'm just checking on the ask that we're making of government in terms of those forecasts for the rate of return that we've mentioned. I just wanted to know whether the ask is more about mitigating COVID and its effect on current enterprise, or is it actually nimbly associating ourselves with the opportunities which arise from new ways of working? Because a lot of our investment programme has been predicated on getting people in and out of city and town centres. And as we've seen in Leeds, where the proportion of people occupying office space which is being delivered as part of our economic expansion, that's very limited at the moment. And are we refocusing our ask of government to recognise the potential of smaller communities as workplaces and places where economic growth can be initiated?
I think it's probably an and answer, is that, rather than instead of, isn't it? Brian, would you like to come back on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's both. I mean, obviously we're in survival mode, and then we need to, we need to get to recovery and resilience. And obviously, with limited resources, we need to make sure we're, investing in where we're going to get the best return. Certainly, digital technologies and transition to net zero are areas which offer huge growth potential, and also we're looking at building on some of the strengths that we've got as a region, some of the capabilities, particularly around health and health innovation. And I think what we've tried to do is pull out the distinctive competencies that we've got in the region and use that as a platform to stimulate economic growth. I think we've been very ambitious on entrepreneurship as well. I mean, as people come off furlough, You will see an increase in new firm formation rates and new approaches to working. You know, I think we've got that balance right. I don't think there's a perfect answer.
Thank you. Obviously, we're trying to do rescue and recovery all at the same time, aren't we? So some of these investments that we're making are long-term investments as well, not just for the immediate future. So you need to think about city and town centres. Roger, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I really just wanted to emphasise the point that Brian made, but also to address Stuart's very fair question. Recovery, we are using this as an opportunity not only to rescue what we've currently got, but to reimagine the shape of the economy going forward, as well as trying in a further stage to build in resilience to this and other things. And the total ask, whilst it's 750 million for some of the rescue part and the reimagining, the total ask is 1.4 billion. And it's well considered in my view. And one of the challenges, however, is we don't know what we don't know in terms of the pattern of re-entering office blocks, particularly in city centres like Leeds and Bradford, on the one hand, but government are also alive to the fact that actually they've done quite a lot to support towns, the Stronger Towns Fund, that maybe there's something they need to think about in terms of supporting the reimagining of our cities. But I think that's somewhere down the line, and what we're trying to do is to perhaps be ahead of that in any budget and comprehensive spending review discussions. And this is a first shot at it, where we can make a significant economic offer to the nation at a relatively modest investment from the taxpayer. And that's been the thinking behind the recovery in the 3 stages of rescue, reimagine, but also building longer term resilience.
Thank you, Roger. And certainly we're coming on to that later in the agenda, right? We've got the Getting Building Fund, which has a few investments in city centres, which will help with some of that reimagining of our city centres. So more of that later. Okay, I've not seen anybody else indicating for that item. Brian, did you want to just come in briefly before we close?
Yeah, very briefly, just picking up on Councillor Galton's point. The golden key to unlocking all this is skills, and increasing the supply of skills in key sectors, making sure that we've identified the skills of the future, making sure that we're creating progression opportunities for unemployed people, and that's the sustainable source of economic recovery, investing in people and investing in skills. And I know it's covered later on the agenda as part of the strategy, but I think it's an important point to make. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. So with that, can I just ask people to agree the recommendations, which are largely noting? All those in favour, please show. Thank you very much. That is carried. And we'll now move on to item 6 on the agenda, which is capital spending and project approvals. Now, Councillor Jeffrey, leader of Wakefield, chairs this committee, but obviously sent her apologies today. Roger, you are on that committee and have volunteered to just say a few opening remarks before that paper goes to vote. Obviously, all these projects have been through a process on that committee already. Roger?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, there are a few remarks I'd like to make to set the scene, particularly as since the last Combined Authority meeting in July, there have been 2 meetings of the Investment Committee, and we're actually considering the progress of no less than 16 schemes today. And as you rightly say, I'm deputising for Councillor Jeffrey. David Haskins is on the call, as well as Ben, and perhaps even Councillor Groves when it comes to anything to do with Transforming Cities Fund projects, if we want to get into detail. I think an important point, as I said, the report provides details of those 16 schemes and recommends to the Combined Authority and seeks its approval for progression and funding, and in some cases approval to changes to those schemes. There are also some schemes that are approved by the Investment Committee through the delegation from the Combined Authority, and they're also in the report. The timing of the Investment Committee, which was earlier this week, meant that, so as to meet the deadline for publishing the papers for this meeting, that there was an assumption made that various recommendations will be made about the project yet to be considered by the Invest Committee, and that the chair would comment as to whether there'd been any material or other changes to those recommendations following the formal Investment Committee meeting. And I can confirm that there are no changes to the recommendations that were anticipated and included in the papers that you have seen. The report does set out and maps the process and decision point, the total value of the scheme, the funding source at this decision point, and the various tolerances therein. As I said, there are 16 schemes set out in this report, and the total value, which is a little over £332 million, of which 292 million will be sought from the Combined Authority when fully approved. And as part of this approval request, the allocation of 20.8 million is sought to develop and further deliver these schemes. I should also add, because it's becoming a confusing landscape in terms of the funding, that these 16 schemes, even whole or in part, are funded from what's the residue of the Local Growth Fund, the continuing West Yorkshire Plus Transport Fund, the recently announced Brownfield Housing Fund, the Transforming Cities Fund, the very recently announced Getting Building Fund, LTP and LPTIP. So there's a variety of funding sources covering these schemes. And as I said, the request across the 16 is for approval to spend £20.85 million. As I said, there were some decisions made by the Combined Authorities Investment Committee under delegated authority and some changes that have taken place. And under that delegation, a total expenditure of 1.6 million has been, additional expenditure has been approved. I should also add that we are continuing to ensure that all of the projects that we're looking to invest in, that we build in our integrated clean growth aspects. And equally, we're also commissioning some work, not only to look forward, but to look back at what we've already invested in, and very clear in my own mind that we should be transparent about what has been the economic benefits, but also what has been the climate issues, and if there are things we have to address. A further approval we're seeking in this part of the meeting is in relation to the Growing Places Fund, which you may remember was something back in 2012 that was set up to stimulate either slow or stalled development projects. We took a decision as a region to have a soft loan basis rather than a grant basis, and a number of those funds are revolving back to us. But it won't be surprising to members that as a result of the pandemic, there are one or two strains and stresses out there. And what we're seeking is that the Section 73 officer, the authority be delegated to her to make decisions on any appropriate variations of terms so as to not cause further unnecessary distress to businesses at this challenging time. Furthermore, we're also looking to get the Combined Authority to delegate authority to the Investment Committee in relation to tranche 2 of the emergency active travel funding, some £10 million. And I'm guessing Councillor Groves may or may not come back in on that. And of course, as Councillor Galton's already pointed out, trying to ensure in what is an evolving landscape that we continue to invest not only for the here and now, but to as future-proof as much as we can and continue with those investments. I should add that a number of them, particularly the Local Growth Fund and the Transforming Cities Fund, are projects agreed with government and still command their support for implementation within West Yorkshire. So I'll pause there, Chair, to see if there are any questions before perhaps we could consider the consider the recommendations at the end of the paper, and I'll reference those when I remind myself of which pages they're on. Chair.
Thank you very much, Roger. So obviously this is one of the very exciting things the Combined Authority is able to do, which is make these major investments in those schemes that we all recognise from our own patch around the authority, which is really going to make a huge difference to some of the city centre challenges that we're talking about there and some of the town centre challenges that we referred to earlier in the conversation. So any comments or questions on these papers here? Councillor Galton.
Well, it's a continuation of a theme, really, from my previous question. And I think it specifically concerns Transforming Cities Fund, where the majority of the schemes which were formulated were done prior to the COVID emergency. And once again, do focus primarily on commuting to and from town and city centres. And detailed within it, some of them are very good at referencing the value to cyclists and, for instance, association with the National Cycle Network. One of the issues that's happened with the National Cycle Network is that they have taken quite significant lengths out of it when there is not sufficient segregation of cyclists from other road users. And one of the things that I did notice in a lot of the bids that are coming forward for cycle and bus lanes on the key corridors is that all of the evaluation for the implementation of significant lengths of cycle and bus lanes were only predicated on the value that they had for the speed of the bus journey, and no quantification seemed to have been attempted for value for cyclists and the ability to deliver modal change to get cyclists onto these key corridors. And I just wondered if we could have some feedback on that, how we do actually involve cyclists in the consultation on schemes such as this, and also how we evaluate the value of them. Because I think it's something that we could re-evaluate as we're going forward to show that we're actually taking into consideration the needs for active travel post-COVID. And perhaps because Roger Marsh mentioned that we do have control of these schemes now, we can actually rebalance them to take that into consideration.
Thank you, Councillor Galton. So I think we are reviewing all our schemes, and I'll come to Ben in a minute to perhaps come back on some of that. Obviously, we have to follow an assurance framework for every scheme that is going through the Combined Authority, which has to be approved by government. And we could have a much larger conversation about the Treasury Green Book that we all have to work as a point of reference for. And I do think there's some absolute social benefits which are not captured by this Treasury Green Book at all. And I've been a firm advocate for trying to change that Treasury Green Book to recognise some of that for a long time. And I'd love to do the same here too. But Ben, would you like to come back on? Obviously, it's a different changed world. We have to be able to review what we're doing, but also climate emergency is something which is particularly pressing for our residents, and they want to still see that delivered. So cycling is still very important. Ben?
Thank you, Chair. I'll make a few comments, and I'll probably pass to Dave Haskins as well, who might be able to give a bit of detail about the the assumptions made in some of the modelling and the economic case that addresses the point about the value for cyclists, or rather the value for time that's taken account of in the modelling. I think by way of general comments, I just echo what Councillor Hinchcliffe has just said. Each scheme, as well as the programme in totality, goes through the assurance process and therefore is considered in its merits. And we're already looking at schemes in the context of their carbon footprint and how we reduce their net carbon impacts. The Transforming Cities Fund schemes are a good example of a set of projects that were developed to enhance cycling as one of their core aims, as well as the use of public transport, to improve the connectivity across the city region. So although they're focused on corridors, they're not solely about moving people from one part to another. They're part of a wider connectivity pattern. And at the moment, the kind of the overarching economic assumptions that are made are common to all of those schemes. But we would want to look at that, of course, in the light of changing trends. I think it's probably too early for us to understand whether there's been fundamental different changes to the overall nature of the commuting pattern at this point, but we will absolutely keep those things under review. Dave, do you want to just say a bit about some of the assurance process there?
Sure. I mean, I'll just come in to start with by saying, first of all, the Transforming Cities Fund schemes that are coming forward at what's called a strategic outline case. That's a pretty early stage in the assessment in appraisal terms. When we get to the outline business case, which will be the next decision point and approval stage, that's when we really get into more detail in terms of the way the appraisal is done. There's a wider point to be made around guidance has come through the Transforming Cities Fund during the Transforming Cities Fund process from government around a greater level of stringency, shall we call it, around what actually a good cycle network should be. As you point out, Councillor Galton, there's some routes have been taken out of national cycle networks. They don't meet that standard. It's been made absolutely clear to us and to the partner councils here that the measures that are going to be developed need to meet the standards that government is prescribing here, and that will play out through the appraisal as well. So I think what we're trying to say is that more detail will come through as we go to this next stage, and in the same way as we looked in the submission we made to government, we looked at the benefits to cyclists and walking, as well as the disbenefits that might be caused to highway users when you take out maybe a bit of highway space to put some of this provision in. Government were happy for us to look at that assessment on a with and without those disbenefits basis, and I think we will continue to present figures in that way going forward as the most helpful way of doing it. I think what Ben also says there about the point about it being too early to see how patterns have changed. There are different types of cycle trips are clearly taking place at the moment. By the time we come through to OBC, outline business case, patterns may well have changed again, and we'll have to take on board prevailing government guidance at that point in time as to how we do that. I think there's one other point you asked a question about how cycle groups are involved in this. I think it's fair to say in all projects that we've undertaken, particularly from City Connect and in wider projects, we have an extensive network now of tapping into those various cycle forums. As people are aware, there are different types of cyclists, and it's very, very difficult to please all types of cyclists. But I think we've very often come to a consensus as best as possible to meet the requirements of those different groups, and we involve them all the way through the project as well, and we'll continue to do that. If there's any other points that are not picked up here, I'm happy to try and answer them.
Thank you very much. So comprehensive response there to those items. Anything else before we move on to the next item? Because that is, again, continues with the investment, which is getting building fund, which we can come back to Roger. No more questions or comments? In that case, Roger, would you like to make recommendations?
So was somebody wanting to come in? No?
Yeah, it's John Pennington here. My hand isn't working, leader. So can I just make some
raise your manual one, John, in that case.
Yeah, I've only got a frozen picture of myself. That's not helping either. But anyway, let's just some comments you asked for. Just to come back to the cycling, we've got some big schemes in Bradford for this super cycle highway, which is excellent. Up Thornton Road, I don't know how far up Thornton Road it's going to go, but remember we've got a very nice viaduct at the top of Thornton Road, which then runs across towards Halifax. We're going to spend a lot of money on Halifax bus station, and we've got Queensbury Tunnel in the middle. And the last gentleman to speak has been talking about the different types of cycling and the cycling groups and cycling corridors. And there's an ideal one there ready for being a huge asset to the whole district. I'd point out some work up Manchester Road, where we already have a bus lane up Manchester Road. And also on brownfield sites, we have a big site up Ingleby Road for 160 houses, which is sat there waiting for some attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Obviously, lots of opportunities in Bradford, which I fully endorse. Queensbury Tunnel, obviously, it's a separate conversation that we're having with government, and I know you're well aware of that, John. So I know we're both on the same page with that, trying to get that funded from government. So any more questions, comments before we move on to that? Lovely. So Roger, would you like to just come in with the recommendations and then we'll move to the vote?
Thank you, Chair. And I'll do them in, there are three. The first one is to approve the Combined Authority to approve the recommendations from the Invest Committee to progress those 16 schemes and an initial investment of just over 20.85 million, and those changes already recommended by the Combined Authority, number one. Number two, to seek authority to delegate Section 73 officer in relation to the Growing Places Fund and any variations to terms from those with outstanding loans, so as to reduce any further strain on those businesses, and such variations to be reported to the Business Investment Panel, which is chaired by Councillor Blake. And the third one is to delegate in relation to tranche 2 of the Emergency Active Travel Funding, to delegate the Investment Committee approval to Pathway and other allocations in advance of the Combined Authority, which the next one of which is on the 10th of November. I think those are the three clusters of recommendations.
I'm happy to second that. Can I see all those in favour, please? Lovely, that seems to be carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, Roger. I believe you have the next item as well, which is Getting Building Fund. Not catchy as a title, but it's significant as an investment, so please proceed.
Yes, and as people might be aware, at relatively short notice, we were invited, as indeed other areas around the country, invited to come up with what's colloquially known as shovel-ready schemes that could be delivered by 31st of March 2022, or at least substantially committed thereto. This was without knowing what the size of the fund would be, and Appendix 1 to this agenda item sets out the nature of the projects to be funded. Just by way of background for members, when we developed a scheme of funds, a scheme of projects, we created what we called a core list, valued to some 37 million, a core plus and a core plus plus, and the core plus plus was in excess of 400 million pounds. I'm delighted that we were allocated 52.6 million, which was above our core, and there are a number, as I said, a number of schemes there set out. What is also pleasing to note that out of what turned out to be a 900 million pound Getting Building Fund, that a shade under 40% of that allocation came to the north. And I guess, as all of us as proud Northerners, we will see that as a useful baseline for any future allocations of funding as part of levelling up. As I've said, the projects are all listed in the paper. A lot of them do affect people right across the region, and I commend them to you. We believe with all of our delivery partners across the local authorities, we are ready to respond and make sure these come to fruition on or before the 31st of March 2022, and we seek approval to get on with these projects. I'll happily, and may have to bring other officers in if people wanted to talk about the detail of any particular projects, and I'll come back to the recommendations once any questions or comments have been made from colleagues, Chair.
Thank you, and can I say just thank you to West Yorkshire Combined Authority officers who worked so hard to get that up and running at short notice, as you suggest, and also to the local authority respective officers who pulled out all the stops to make sure we all had some good shovel-ready programmes in play and got a lot of those over the line. So some really exciting opportunities there going forward. Any questions or comments? Not seeing anybody indicating. I think we're all just delighted to have the money, aren't we, and have the projects going on in our place. And they've all got to be delivered in quite short order as well, Roger. So, Roger, would you like to move to recommendations in that case?
And if I may, Chair, just also to inform colleagues that the last tranche of our local growth fund for investment through to March 21 has now been received. So we have received the full 516 million, this 52.6 6 million is on top thereof. Pages 158 and 159, para 9 sets out the recommendations, and on the basis of those recommendations, could I invite through you, Chair, and colleagues to give their approval?
I have to second that. All those in favour, please show. Thank you very much. That is carried. Wonderful. So moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is Devolution Deal. We have the feedback from the members of the public, and can I say I'm delighted that we've managed to garner so much feedback. We were concerned when we started this process that given COVID, we might not be able to get to the same level of consultation responses as other areas, but we have, and in fact we've surpassed that. So it's great to see that. Obviously this represents the next stage on our path to devolution, and we've already seen, we talked about getting building funding, Transforming Cities Fund, but also the Brownfield Fund that we've not discussed today, that we're already getting a share of, even though we're not yet a Mayoral Combined Authority. And obviously that investment is very much needed, and we can make it go a long, long way in this region. So can I ask, is it Ben or Alan who wishes to, as an officer, just to introduce this item before we go to any questions or comments?
It's Alan.
Yeah,
Alan?
I'm very happy to speak to this. So in May, the Combined Authority and each council endorsed the conclusions of the governance review, and then considered and endorsed the scheme, which sets out the detail of how the proposed governance arrangements would work in the future, and agreed to take forward a public consultation exercise on those proposals. What we're doing today is the Combined Authority is asked to consider the outcome of that consultation, which has been undertaken jointly by the councils and the Combined Authority, and resolve to submit a summary of those consultation responses to the Secretary of State. And this is a key part of the statutory process that is needed to bring the Mayoral Combined Authority into existence. So subject to a positive decision today and a decision of each of the constituent councils, the proposal is for the report that talks about that summarises the consultation responses and is attached to Appendix 1 would be submitted to the Secretary of State. This report or similar versions of this report has already been considered by the executive or cabinet and full council meetings of Leeds, Calderdale and Wakefield, and the executive of Kirklees earlier this week, and Bradford and Kirklees full council meetings are considering it early next week. As Councillor Hinchcliffe said, we had over 4,400 responses to the consultation, and we also had a number who responded to an additional survey that we did of digitally disadvantaged communities, mindful of the fact that during this period there are some people who won't have been able to access the consultation if they didn't have the appropriate, the necessary access to IT. So we made some effort to reach out to those communities as well. Across every question that was asked and all the key themes that were within the consultation, there was overall support for the proposal set out within the scheme, and the positive responses outweigh those people who said they strongly agreed or agreed, outweighed the number who disagreed or strongly disagreed. So the recommendations today, firstly, to consider or comment on the content of the report and the summary of consultation responses, then to agree to submit the summary of consultation responses to the Secretary of State, and to delegate authority to the MD of the Combined Authority in consultation with the leader and chief executives of each constituent council and the chair of the CA to finalise and submit those documents subject to any technical issues. The third thing is to note the updated timetable, because this is not the end of the process. There are some further steps to go through, such as consent by the councils and the Combined Authority to the draft order, which is the piece of legislation that will eventually be laid in Parliament, and that consent happens in November. Then to resolve that this decision is exempt from call-in on the grounds of urgency for reasons that are set out. Then to agree that Tom Riddon, Leeds City Council Chief Executive, is appointed as the Combined Authority returning officer in respect of the mayoral election, subject to that appointment being confirmed by the CA early in 2021. And then lastly, we're asking today, as part of the deal, some funding was provided. £200,000 was provided to support the work of the Yorkshire Leaders Board. There is a request here today for the CA to become a full member of that Leaders Board, including providing a financial contribution to support working at that regional level, and that would be in line with the amount contributed by comparable city region combined authorities and larger local authorities, but the amount varies year to year, which is why we haven't specified the amount. With that, I'll stop there. Hopefully that's hopefully enough for now, and I can very happy to take questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Alan. Any questions or comments on what Alan has said so far, Councillor Galton?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I think it's one for clarification in terms of the consultation. We have had our devolution debate at Leeds City Council, and one of the common themes that came through was how well the consultation was done given the low participation of the potential population. But there was also a parallel debate about the ability of the mayoral powers to do with spatial planning, to the point where a group put forward an amendment to clarify that individual authorities had a veto from any spatial plan being imposed upon them by the mayor. So I just think it's worth having clarification here that actually those safety measures are already in place, those checks and balances, as part of the mayoral deal, as I understood it. And secondly, since we have actually just had those powers passed to us in devolution, is the combined authority going to take part in the consultation around the planning changes introduced by the minister, which could, by the looks of it, take away those powers which they've just devolved to the region around spatial planning?
Yes, so government's planning reforms discussed. Let's not discuss that actually now, because obviously this is just about the devolution paper. You're taking us off on a bit of a tangent there, Councillor Galton, although however much I'd like to discuss that matter, but
well, rather than discuss it, it was just a clarification that the combined authority would take place with the consultation.
Absolutely. Let me just check with officers to get back to you on that question. Alan, would you like to get back to on that question?
Yes, absolutely. So in response to the first question, there are a number of planning functions and housing functions that the mayor would have. 2 points to make. One is that in cases of things like creating a mayoral development area or a mayoral development corporation or purchase of land for the purposes of development, the mayor can only exercise those functions with the agreement of the constituent council in which the land is based. So there has to be agreement from the council. The mayor can't do it if the relevant council wants to stop it from happening. The second is in relation to the spatial development strategy, and in order for the spatial development strategy to be approved, it requires the unanimous consent of the 5 constituent council representatives on the CA.
Councillor Shabir Pandor would like to come in. Councillor Shabir.
No, I was just going to say that I think Alan clarified it, that based on all the discussions that we've had in the past, it was very, very clear that the spatial strategy regarding planning was dependent on each local authority agreeing to it. So I don't know what further reassurance we can put in. It's in there, and I can reassure him. Alan just mentioned that. We also talked about the consultation and the details that in the report. But my understanding, based on the other mayoral combined authorities that went through a similar process, we had 4 times more responses in terms of feedback than any other mayoral combined authority, or certainly the one that we have been through so recently. And also, at what point does it become statistically significant? And that was the key issue that we discussed at Cabinet last week. But obviously, this is just a first part of the overall journey. This is just to have a debate in council, which I understand a couple of authorities have already had in terms of the consultation feedback. And again, we are at the mercy of the ministers. This is something that the government rightly has actually, said that, we want to level up. This is our opportunity to level up. Leeds City region was the only core city in the UK that didn't have a deal. This is our opportunity, and this is our moment. So we need to actually, challenge and scrutinise. At the same time, we need to actually look at the positives and move forward with it. Chair, thanks.
Absolutely, thank you, Councillor Pandor. Absolutely, we've already seen in this meeting some of the benefits of having a MCA deal in the offing, and therefore we need to seal that deal to get the further benefits that will give us. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I too had a question very similar to that posed by, is it Stuart Galton?
Galton, yeah.
And that question was satisfied earlier by Caroline Allen and Alan Rees. My party, and I think generally in Calderdale, there was great concern about the essential requirement that individual local authorities should have a veto about anything that's happening in their patch. And I think that that's essential, and those reassurances are being given. But my question is about the consultation in general. It's come quite late in the day, and there, I'm sure, will be many comments which are nuanced opinions about things as people see it with this devolution. Things like the mayoral fundraising powers, the mayoral levy. And again, I've been given some assurances earlier by Alan Rees and Caroline about this, but I would hope that we can do some analysis of the nuanced opinions and see if there's any things that people are saying in our region which are worthy of inclusion somehow in the final papers that we submit. I'm sure there'll be lots of ideas in there, and hopefully we'll have some flexibility to tune up this paper to absolutely suit our part of the country, and not be hidebound thereafter by stringent rules that don't allow us to operate in accordance with our local requirements. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Certainly, we need to take the benefit of all those consultation responses, don't we, and make sure that any insight from that enables us to use it and develop the combined authority further. Because obviously the whole point of this is delivering what people want and to make their lives better. And if people have good ideas about how we should do that and how we should involve them more, we absolutely need to take heed of that. We don't get to be politicians and leaders without taking heed of what people think, do we? And we need to practice that on the combined authority as we do in our own local authorities.
Spot on. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Ben, I'm going to come to you. I'm not seeing anybody else indicating. Ben, would you like to quickly come in?
Leader, it's John Pennington again.
Sorry, John, I didn't see you there.
I've sent you a message. That's not working now, so I think it's folding down gradually. But just briefly, to come back to Stephen Lee's comments there about an analysis, he's hit the nail on the head there, because this consultation, we've not made the most of the messages that are in there. For instance, it does warn over greater bureaucracy. Well, we're not surprised at that. But it also mentions political independence for the PCC, which is a very strong point. But if you look at the Ipsos Mori poll, a third of people actually disagreed, and they disagreed on 2 or 3 of the big topics. So that's a thing to look at. The ones where they did agree, and it was really a landslide, and it's all good stuff, it was hugely in favour of transport, which we know about, and then secondly, in favour of the young people training and skills. So Stephen's right about having some sort of analysis, because it's quite good stuff.
Absolutely. So perhaps, Alan, that's something you can do. Perhaps with the informal combined authority meeting, it might be helpful to look at some of that feedback in more detail. Ben, did you want to come in and perhaps respond to the comment that Councillor Pennington made there?
Thank you, Chair. Well, it was really actually just to reiterate the point that you've just made, that the Ipsos Mori report is an independent report of all the findings, and that gets submitted directly to government to inform their drafting of the order that will come back to authorities for consideration later in the year. I think you're absolutely right that there are insights in there that need or that will benefit from further examination, and we will of course do that. But of course the primary channel now is government, because these are reports that we're sending to the Secretary of State, who will look at these in determining the draft order.
Thank you very much. So with that, Alan was very clear in the recommendations in his opening remarks, so we know what those are. Councillor Beck, did you want to say anything about Yorkshire Leaders Board? It's something you chair, of course, and obviously there's investment in here for the Yorkshire Leaders Board. I don't know if you wanted to say anything about that.
I don't think there's much to add at the moment, Chair. We're obviously heading towards the next round of meetings. There's a lot of interest across Yorkshire about how we can pull together. I think we're hoping that the other areas sort out their arrangements fairly quickly so that we can actually all work together, because I don't think it's any secret that for the vast majority of us on the call, the One Yorkshire model of devolution was our preferred option. I still believe that a few years down the line it will probably come back as being about the right scale of devolution that's required for the challenges that we face across our region. So I don't think there's any detail to add at the moment, but it's getting everything up and running and making sure that we keep the engagement going and work out the priority areas that will help us move forward in incredibly challenging times.
Absolutely, thank you. Hear, hear. Right, so with that, I'm happy to propose the recommendations that Alan outlined in the opening remarks. Can I see all those in favour, please show? That is carried, thank you very much. And now moving then on to the next item, which is adult education budget, which is related to the previous item because it is a large element of the devolution deal that we have achieved with government, in that £64 million, or is it £63 million worth of adult education budget gets transferred to the region to commission skills development and training for the people of the districts, and that comes to us to commission rather than government to commission, and that's a really significant milestone for us. We've had to go through consultation again, and people have fed into what we propose, and we've made a few changes as a result. We already have a pre-existing relationship with a lot of the providers, obviously a lot of the colleges there that we've worked with, and going forward we need to be able to make sure we make that money work best for us and build on the learning delivery agreements which we've had with each of the districts and each of the partners in FE over the last few years, which proved to be very successful. So for us, this is the latest iteration in taking charge of our skills funding in the region. All we need is more skills funding. And of course, we talked about that earlier in the conversation. So we want to just Lindsay, do you want to say something on this? Are you speaking on this?
Yes, I can do. Yeah. So thank you, Chair. As you said, obviously the paper's update on the AB devolution, the strategy that we've had out for consultation recently, and particular features of the strategy as we've revised it now include close working between local authorities and the combined authority to make sure that we can oversee our training provider delivery plans and performance and really increase the scrutiny on delivery and the impact for communities. I think, as you rightly raise, in the current national system, about 90% of the funding is delivered without any local authority or combined authority formal influence over AE planning, and no consequence to the funding allocations if delivery doesn't meet our strategic need or our local needs. So this is our real opportunity to make sure that the training provision in the areas for adults is aligning to our strategies. Within the Within the strategy, we've outlined that we want to ensure that funds are responsive to the ever-changing learner and area needs that we have, particularly given the current and rapidly changing economic landscape that we're facing. We outline that we want to develop a needs-based allocation and ensure that funding is directed towards communities of need. We will need to do quite a bit of work on this with our local authority colleagues, and it will be brought to the Combined Authority for approval. So we're suggesting that in the first year of delivery, that what we will do is we'll protect the proportion of funding that's going to be spent in each local authority based on previous usage, and hopefully therefore supporting a bit of stability within the system and the learning opportunities for our residents. We recognise very much the importance of community learning, and that's something that's really been strengthened within the strategy following some of the feedback that we had in the consultation, making sure that we do through our commissioning process outreach into those disadvantaged areas and act to improve life prospects for individuals. As you've heard me say already, it's very key within the strategy that we do maintain some stability within the system within the first few years. We are aware, given the current pandemic, there's a huge impact on a number of the training providers in our area and the stability of the skills system. So, we need to play our part in, although we want to improve the impact of this fund, we need to make sure that we're making changes in a controlled way and in a way that doesn't impact too significantly in the immediate future. But over time, certainly developing measurements and within the funding mechanism to make sure that we are going to be focusing very much on the impact of this funding on the area rather than outputs, which is really the measurement that ESFA look at the moment. So in terms of the consultation, that we had some really informed and considered responses, not as many as the wider devolution consultation, given that it's quite a niche subject, but we had general agreement on the approach to commissioning, about 82% in terms of agreement in that approach. And then the funding priorities that we'd listed had a 90% approval rating as well. So in terms of the recommendations, we're asking that the Combined Authority approves the AEB strategy and allows for commissioning to begin on the 1st of October this year, which is all essential in terms of us meeting the delivery deadlines and being ready for AEB devolution delivery by August 2021. In particular, approving the strategy means that we will be able to move forward with allocation values for the Leeds City Region grant providers, as we've outlined within the strategy. We'll be able to issue indicative allocations, hopefully later on this year, and then we'll be able to confirm those in March once ESFA have confirmed our West Yorkshire value. We will also, throughout sort of the end of this year and moving forward, be able to then start to develop the delivery plans with our grant providers, which will probably use around 70 to 80% of the AEB funding that we'll receive from August onwards. We'll be able to begin the procurement of the training provision, which will be about around £9 million, we believe, and we aim to start that on the 1st of October. And within the strategy, we also plan to retain an element of funding in terms of, to help us with responsiveness. We'll commission that in 21-22 once we've started delivery, but we're mindful that we feel as though a little bit needs to be held back, given the ever-changing issues that we're seeing and the responsiveness we will need to keep and be able to act upon when we see the economic picture in August 2021.
Lovely, thank you very much. So, any questions or comments on that paper? So some of it's quite technical, but Councillor Galton.
Well, you can allow me not to get too technical. It's really about generalities. One of the things that we're doing, of course, is forward planning, and we've got our climate change strategy, which is different from the Combined Authority, of course, because our timescale to get to net zero is different to the local authorities that are our constituent parts. But each of them, for instance, is at some pace. And one of the issues that was raised was we need some significant offsetting, and that will involve quite a bit of tree planting. But for instance, the tree maintenance that goes with a lot of trees being planted there's only one place in the region that does arboricultural qualifications. And I just wondered if we'd been doing any forecasting as part of our adult education commissioning programme, not just for what we want to see next year, but what we see to be the bulge areas in demand over the next 5 years, so that we're covering things like climate change and our growth areas we've responded to in that, but also in things like the care and health economy, not just through the digital transformation aspect of it, but in terms of the retraining of people, understanding that we need something in between a degree nursing qualification, something a little bit next step down for those people that are working in the care industry. Are we, what's the word? Are we curating that kind of capacity and identifying where the gaps currently are so that we can encourage our partners to develop into them?
Yes, Councillor Galton, about the obviously investment in climate emergency also means climate emergency skills. There's some positives to that as well, isn't there? We have to remember ourselves though that AEB doesn't answer all our questions on skills. We need to get further investment on skills, perhaps from our gain share, perhaps additional money that's spent nationally needs to be spent. This is already money that's being spent in the region now, remember. So we have to keep pitching for more money on skills to fulfil exactly some of the requirements you said there. Lindsay, particularly on arboriculture, have we anything in the AEB on arboriculture?
Not specifically within the strategy. However, as part of our work in discussion with local authorities, so local authorities will be involved in helping us develop the procurement specification. So we will, if we are seeing that as a key need within areas, and we're not, just to pick up on your point, it's not just looking at procuring for the year ahead. We are looking to procure for 3 years ahead, and equally in our delivery planning with all of our training providers, we'll be looking at the provision that they're putting on board for the next year and in the future as well, and looking to absolutely meet the future sector needs and the future skills needs that we have within the area. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. Kim, Councillor Groves.
Thank you. Obviously, we've got some fantastic further education colleges. My question was more around, you said about commissioning at this stage, how you've got the intelligence and the data to do that effectively, because if we do the same thing in the communities, we're going to get the same outputs. And actually, we should be looking at inclusive growth, social mobility. And I'm just wondering, how you've got that intelligence at this stage to make sure that we've got a really good span of providers that can, just putting into Councillor Bolton's speech question, was can equip adults with who have been out of the employment space for many years with the skills that are needed for the new green economies and health.
Lindsay?
Yep. So in terms of data, so we've got quite an extensive view of the data of what has been delivered through AEB, and I think Councillor Hinchcliffe's point is really crucial in this. We need to remember that this money has already been spent in our area for a number of years. We've got really clear sight of the data of what has been delivered within West Yorkshire from 17-18 onwards. So to an extent, what we are, but equally, we don't just want to necessarily be commissioning the same activity. We will be, and as part of the procurement, as I mentioned, we will be working with local authorities to check that analysis of what is being delivered across the local authority areas and within specific local authorities, and make and really target and consider whether some of that needs to change and whether we'll be procuring along different lines based on the different local strategies. In terms of individuals who are out of employment, around 40% of the funding so far in previous years is spent on unemployed and getting them back into work. We would expect that to increase, particularly over the coming years and in our tenure of managing the fund. We have within our approach specified that we will look for trying to introduce some flexibilities, perhaps some test pilots, to make sure that the support that we're giving to individuals as you say, meets those different reskilling for different sectors, but equally offers additional support for those who've been out of the labour market for quite some time. And I think with our commitment to continuing community learning and outreach into disadvantaged communities, we're wanting to make sure that we are meeting that inclusive growth need and not leaving people further away from the labour market with that support as well.
Councillor Dragon.
Yes, just following on Councillor Galton's point about the climate emergency and the skills that are going to be needed. I mean, particularly with the economic crisis that we're facing in the next few months, I think certainly we need to identify those sectors which are shedding most jobs and what skills those people have already got that can be built on towards, in a way, it's sort of the swords into plowshares type of scenario, really, of looking at skills that people have got that are being made redundant and how can they best use them in the new economy and get the extra skills that they need. So, for instance, in the construction industry, massive retrofitting work needed doing. There's people with building skills out there, but they might not have the new skills that are needed for the new technologies. So, how can we actually make sure that the providers are gearing up for that so that we then have local workforce that we're developing to be able to provide that, rather than drawing people in and leaving others unemployed at the same time to actually meet our climate objectives.
So I think obviously this is also our skills element within the economic recovery plan for West Yorkshire.
Yes.
So in the papers there is a draft of that plan, albeit it's obviously first draft, so there will be more work on that. But skills is a big part of that, Councillor Dragon. You're absolutely right in everything you say there about making sure we've got the skills and that people are ready to take the economic opportunity which comes with the climate emergency actions. It's not all about penalties in climate emergency. There is massive opportunity there for economic growth and jobs as well.
It's also about the long having that long-term view that we need to be training the trainers now for them to be have the requisite skills in a year's time for the new people coming up into the colleges.
So, Lindsay, do you want to just say a little bit about, I'm not sure if you're fully cited on it, if it's your area, but the West Yorkshire Economic Recovery skills elements of that, as opposed to the AEB stuff that we've been talking about today, just briefly. So I
might pass to Alan on that, if that's okay, as he has his hand up.
Yeah, so the one of the propositions that we have we've been putting in, and there's a link to this earlier on in the agenda at item 5, is about our transition towards a net zero carbon economy, and one of the key elements of that is about precisely this issue. So there are asks in there totaling well over £10 million to identify skills gaps and address those, support employers to fill the roles, improve engagement between employers and training providers, and build capacity for training that's sustainable, support people to get into green jobs, diversify our zero carbon jobs talent pipeline, and we're also, as part of this, looking to develop a pipeline of low carbon projects in order to aid our transition towards being a net zero carbon economy. And we think that overall, our assessment of this overall is that it could create around 70,000 jobs. It's also worth saying that the Combined Authority's advisory panel on employment and skills is talking about exactly this issue a week on Monday, when they are taking a paper on net zero carbon and the Combined Authority's skills work in respect of it.
Thank you very much. I had Ben and Brian, I think, just wanted to come back in. Brian first, then Ben, perhaps.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to comment on the funding allocations. Feedback from the consultation was that there were some concerns that the Department for Education were basing the funding allocations on 17-18 data, which would have taken no account of any changes since then, either positive or negative. So as a result of that feedback, we've based the allocations on 18-19 data, which is an additional £2.5 million pounds worth of funding. And then on top of that, community learning was mentioned, and again the concerns around community learning. So I'm sure members will be pleased and reassured to know that community learning funding is going to be ring fenced for 2 years, again working with the local authorities. But just to put it into some sort of context, you know, adult skills funding's been cut 45% over the last few years, so we still need to keep pressing and pushing for more funding to support this. Thank you.
Absolutely. And Ben, just to finish with you on that, I think.
Thank you, Chair. It was really just to say that this conversation has been a good example of just how broad and complex the skills issue is, and that it comes down to trying to understand both what's the market demand in what sectors, not just now but in the future, and how does that match with supply, and how do you then broker the right relationship between supply and demand. It's AEB is a really important, but just a part of that. I think that conversation has borne out that there's so much more that we need to do in the space of skills.
Thank you. So moving to recommendations then, I'm happy to propose those recommendations. Can I see all those in favour, please show? Thank you very much. That is carried. So let's get on with that. But obviously, I think the message from all of us is AEB on its own is not enough. We need more. And actually, if we get more, going to Roger's point, usually we can actually deliver more to a UK economy. We're coming to the finals phase of our Future Ready Skills Commission, which will be out later this month, and I'm sure we'll have more debate around that subject then. So moving on now to Strategic Economic Framework, which Roger, I think the LET looked at the other day. Would you like to open this item?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And just to a bright line for member colleagues that the ask at the end of this is to endorse and adopt the concept of the Strategic Economic Framework. And I should just say that at the LET board yesterday, that was approved by the LET board. Just to set a bit of context, since 2014 and refreshed in 2016, the Strategic Economic Plan, or SEP for short, which was originally prepared by the LEP and updated, has been adopted formally by the CA. In other words, we have one economic plan for the geography, one version of the truth, so to speak, in terms of our priorities for growth, inclusion, development, etc. And that plan will run till March 2021 because it formed the basis of the local growth fund, in which we are getting quickly through the last year of investment. And as we've said in earlier parts of this meeting, there are other funds that have come along, which some we bid for, some we get as an automatic right as a prospective MCA. The CEF, or Strategic Economic Framework, CEF for short, not SEP, will form the new overarching economic strategy for the region. It'll set out the vision for the region, our priorities for achieving this. And unlike the Strategic Economic Plan, it won't be a single published document. Will be available electronically and brings together all of our various plans and strategies to form an overall approach. It's all set out in detail in the paper, but just to give some headlines, the CEF as currently developed has 5 sections: our vision, our priorities, what are our policies and strategies to deliver those priorities, who are the partnerships that we need to work with, and how will we monitor and report, and importantly, chart progress, namely impact. And as I said, it can be accessed. An important point is, as with anything, these got to be living documents, so it's not just done once. It's got to be reviewed in the light of evolving circumstances. So, subject to your endorsement and adoption today, the CEF will be formally reviewed every 6 months by officers for updating the sections and reflecting changes in context, policy, and economic and at each stage, both the LEP and the Combined Authority will be asked to endorse and adopt any changes there too. Importantly, in advance of the creation of the Merrill Combined Authority, and colleagues who were at the meeting, the Combined Authority meeting in July, will remember that a single investment fund process was considered and agreed, and there will be work done to bring forward to the November Combined Authority a detailed proposition. But the strategic economic framework will be used to inform the production of that single investment fund strategy and the updated assurance framework. The recommendations are set out on page 202 of the paper, and in appendix 1 to this agenda item number 10 is a fuller document about our vision for the strategic economic framework, as well as including our vision for a 21st century transport system. And perhaps I could just pause there, Chair, before moving the recommendations, which fundamentally, amongst other things, seek this Combined Authority's endorsement and adoption of the strategic economic framework as a replacement for the strategic economic plan, as similarly endorsed and adopted by the LEP yesterday. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Roger, for that. Councillor Pandora, I think you wanted to say something about the inclusive growth elements of this. You're silent, Councillor Pandora. You're on silent, Councillor Pandora.
Sorry. Yeah. Thanks, Chair. I think it's a good report. The economic framework is really robust, and the 5 elements are the right ones. But I was just saying to you, Susan, before that based on the pandemic and the recent issue that we faced, it's important that the issues on poverty, deprivation, the inequalities that we face is actually sort of like underpinned by everything we do. And I also note that the key element, one of the key elements, is tackling the climate emergency. That I think that's good, but also the climate stuff should also be a theme that cuts across the whole of the strategy. But having said that, if you don't secure the money and if you don't secure the resources and the power, then all that means very little. So all this will be dependent on how we secure the finances as we move forward, not just as the LEP, but also for the Combined Authority. So I welcome this, but I think it was important to just to let members know that there are bigger underlying themes that we need to get right to actually make sure that this agenda is actually sort of like driven and delivered and basically achieves the things that we all aspire to. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Pandora. I mean, certainly COVID has redoubled our efforts as local leaders in West Yorkshire to do more on the health inequalities agenda, which has shone such a light on it through this pandemic. We would hope that government will do the same, and we wait to see if they've also had their minds changed on the subject. But certainly for us here in West Yorkshire, very important, and therefore we need to see that reflected in that strategic economic framework. Any more questions or comments? Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm not sure whether this impacts on item 12 later, but it's the same question anyway. And I think, Chair, you've just alluded to COVID and the changing world in which we're living. Roger mentioned reviewing progress, and I think that's very, very important that we should. But my question is about past projects that have used assumptions which might no longer be apposite. So I'm thinking about, I think Roger mentioned making plans from 2014. There's a number of them in the pipeline, as it were. And I know that some early plans made a growth assumption of the GDP growth of 4% or something like that. And we're now living in a world where those growth figures can only be aspirational, but built into the projects are assumptions. So I would ask through the chair whether it might be useful for this board to be updated with a general report on everything that's been assumed and whether we're still on solid ground moving forward with the financial assumptions that lay behind those plans. Thank you, Chair.
Certainly, we had an update at the Economic Recovery Board yesterday, and I think the LEP may have heard a bit of that yesterday as well, in terms of the economic landscape we're operating in. Obviously, nationwide, there's been an economic downturn greater than any of us ever seen before, and that inevitably has an impact on us. I also think that measuring economic outcomes by GVA is not where we should be. Going back to Councillor Pandore's point, I think health inequalities and the healthy life expectancy of people should be the overriding objective of how we measure the success of an economy. I'd like to see more of that reflected rather than the traditional GVA measure. So I think, yes, you're absolutely right. We must keep an eye on that all the time. And I'm sure Roger wants to come back at the end on that. Anything else before we go back to Roger on this point? No. Roger, would you like to therefore respond to Councillor Lee, but also just bring this item to a close?
I will. Thank you. Thank you both to Councillor Pandor and to Councillor Lee for their comments. Councillor Lee, you're absolutely right. And when we set out on the journey, and it seems only like yesterday, but it's nearly 6 years ago for me, we had the aspiration that we'd like to take Leeds City Region to become a net contributing economy, not one that's a net depending economy. And we came up with and you'll have to forgive me because I'm an accountant by profession, we came up with a very simple narrative that £1 from the taxpayer leveraged with at least 4 from the private sector hopefully would double our money in terms of economic impact, the 1 + 4 = 10 formula. As I say, there's no precise science to that. It's interesting, however, with all of the package of funding that we'd had prior to the local growth fund, which we're now almost at the end of, when we test checked, did 1 + 4 = 10 have any veracity? We were able to demonstrate that on those packages, albeit much smaller money, that invested correctly, we did get something like that. And across the range of projects we've undertaken over the last 6 years, sometimes the leverage is as high as 10 to 1, £10 from the private sector to 1, and conversely lower, and you can imagine the range. But overall, we've achieved something like that. Now, clearly, what's happened with COVID has knocked a lot of that backwards. And indeed, if we hadn't done what we've done over the last 6 years, we'd have probably be even further adrift as a result. And it is important that we do look back to look forward more confidently, but not with any complacency. And so I've actually asked the team to suggest that we look at the impact of the local growth fund and the other funds that we've had along the way to that agenda. How far we move the dial, and then how far has that gone backwards as a result of COVID. So it is important that we have that impact assessment, and it needs to be honest about outcomes, not about outputs. And I'm very clear about that. And to Councillor Hinchcliffe's point, GVA is merely a measure, not the whole dashboard of how we've moved the dial on for people. But importantly, to Councillor Pandor's point, I think what unifies all of us is the prize is not a new level of growth, which currently might look like extraordinary economic growth. It's actually what we do with that. And it's about the eradication. And these are my personal words, so forgive me, but I believe passionately about it. It is about the eradication of poverty and deprivation, and doing it in a way that is economically sustainable. And importantly for all of us, I think, and hence why I commend the strategic economic framework, that actually contributes to national wealth rather than continues to depend on it from our part of the world. So that's without sounding overly dramatic or otherwise, that's where we've got to with the flexibility and thinking behind the framework. And I'd like to, before moving the recommendations, pay tribute to officers on the call and beyond, and hopefully through you to other officers, and the thinking that's gone into this, and particularly Alan Rees, who's led this piece of work on your behalf. And subject to there being no further comments, and I'll pause momentarily, could I remove the recommendations as set out in para 9 on page 202 and hopefully seek your endorsement of our future journey from SEP to SEF.
Happy to second that. All those in favour, please show. Thank you very much. So that is carried, just showing that we're excellent value for money, Councillor Lee, I think is what, in summary, Roger Marsh was saying there. So moving on to the next item.
Extraordinarily excellent value for taxpayer money.
We're great VFM is what I'd normally say, and I think we are. So moving on then to the next one, statement of common ground. And Councillor Swift unfortunately has had to leave to attend to an urgent item. But Alan, would you be able to just introduce this item briefly? Thank you.
Yes, will do. Thank you. So this is asking the Combined Authority to re-adopt an updated version of the Statement of Common Ground, which is a planning document which sets out shared ambitions for planning. It is a requirement of MHCLG and part of the National Planning Policy Framework. It was previously approved in 2018 and has been supporting the local plan development process. It has been updated in conjunction with officers from across the region, and it has the new version that's being offered to you for adoption today reflects priorities as they have developed over the last couple of years. So there is more in there, for instance, on climate change and about how the authorities need to work together or will work together to support ambitions in that area. Secondly, a further section on health and well-being, which talks about the ability of plan making to support the delivery of healthy places. And thirdly, education. There is also in the transport section, which already existed, an update to reflect the developing ambitions around mass transit. And that's probably all I need to say. The recommendation is as laid out to adopt it, and then for it to be go through other necessary approvals processes within local authorities. Thank you.
Very much, Alan. Any questions or comments on Statement of Common Ground? It's been to us before to have a look at, I believe. So not a surprise to anybody. No, I'm not seeing any questions or comments. So with that, in the absence of Councillor Swift, I'm happy to recommend that. Can I see all those in favour, please show? Thank you very much. That is carried. Thank you, Alan, for that. Final item on the agenda is corporate planning and performance. Obviously, in this, I always race to the bit that says budget because it is something which obviously concerns us all in this current time. Angela, would you like to just outline this paper before we take any comments or questions?
I will, thank you, Chair. This is the regular update report on a range of corporate matters. So in order, we start with the corporate plan for the current year, which you have previously agreed. We are now monitoring a set of key performance indicators against to demonstrate our performance against that plan. They're set out in Appendix 1. It would be fair to note there are some ambers and reds in there today. That reflects some of the delays we've had to some of the our projects due to COVID, but the teams are on with trying to rescue those positions and try to get those back on track. Second section is corporate risk 2.4. Just to note, we haven't had any significant updates to the corporate risk register since last time when you agreed a number of changes reflecting COVID in particular to the risk register. Section 3, the revenue budget position for the current year. As with most people, this is a challenging bit of our agenda to manage at the moment. We are continuing to work on a revised position for the year, taking into account the impact of COVID. Clearly, the bus funding is a significant issue for us. We have had additional funding from government, and clearly at the moment we are in the throes of ensuring sufficient schools transport and managing the procurement and provision of that service, and ensuring that the funding we have from government is sufficient to match that. We are still funding bus operators on other tendered services, and we're awaiting further guidance about what the future of that funding is from government beyond September. So as we work, we'll continue to work through that. We have had some potential support through the sales fees and charges. We're putting a claim in for that later this month. So our intention is to bring a full update to the November meeting on where we have ended up in all of these various matters. Ties in then to the 2021-22 budget and business planning, which we're obviously turning our minds to as well. But much of what's happening this year flows through to next year. We are intending to keep our 4 overarching strategic priorities in place next year, but clearly they will be against the background of COVID and the economic recovery and our mayoral preparation work as well. The budget for next year is obviously a new world with as we move to being a mayoral combined authority. Our intention is to convene the budget working group later this month and bring a full report back to November on both current year and our plans going forward. I'm happy to take questions on any of those points. Thank you.
And I think as I started this item, I think the budget element is a bit that concerns me most, and obviously that is around the bus transport. Councillor Groves, did you want to say anything about that? I know we've pressed government many times on this issue.
Just that we're going to have to go back to government, and we've still not got any confirmation what the budget will look like, and we really need reassurances for that to actually 2021 in the long term. The gap will become a significant pressure on the combined authority. So we just continue the work, and hopefully we'll have a proposition ready to go to government ahead of the spending review. We've had a good discussion on this at the Transport Committee this morning, and we've identified other potential risks that, if the bus model is not looked at and funding is not available, then we've got all different policy areas that this will affect as well.
Yeah, so there's a sticking plaster, isn't there, nationally on bus transport at the moment, and that's not going to hold for much longer. So there needs to be a much more constructive response from government on how to fund buses, and that's not just with us, is it, Councillor Groves? There's other combined authorities are making the same case. So
they are, but I would add that they are being given additional funding because they have got a tram system and a metro system, and our people are heavily reliant on the bus. I don't want them getting back into cars, and we've got to think of all those other factors. So we need to really press.
Absolutely.
On this
so
one.
it is an urgent matter that we all, as members of the combined authority, need to be conscious of. And push whenever we can with government to make sure they give us an adequate response so that we can continue delivering the bus services that we all want to do. But there has to be a change in that bus model. It just doesn't work as it is at the moment.
No.
Any more comments or questions for Angela on this item? No, I'm not seeing any comments or questions. So with that, I propose recommendations as they are outlined in the paper. Can I see all those in favour, please show? Thank you very much. That is carried. With that, I think we've just got minutes, I think, at the end of the agenda to note. Is there anything else, Ben or Caroline, that you wanted us to be cited on before we close the meeting?
No, Chair.
I'm seeing shakes of the head. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for your attendance at this meeting this afternoon. Lots more to do, but I wish you well for this week, and we'll see you at the next meeting. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.